Welcome to Historynomics. In this series, I am covering the campaigns of the Islamic State in Syria. This is recent history, so some of the events may still be fresh in people's minds. Some may prefer that I use derogatory terminology when referring to one group or another. My goal is to tell the story in as unbiased a way as I can. This chapter begins in late August 2014. ISIS had consolidated control over much of eastern Syria and western Iraq. In Mosul, an all-out offensive against Iraqi Kurdistan in early August had been stopped, after a coalition of Western powers, led by the US, had begun a sustained air campaign against the group. The air campaign was initially launched not to assist the Iraqi Kurds, but to protect billions of dollars in oil assets, controlled by the likes of BP and Chevron. These companies had thousands of US employees working on site, and the US would not allow the infrastructure to fall into the hands of the Islamic State. In northern Syria, ISIS commanders chose to focus the brunt of their forces against the semi-autonomous Kurdish enclaves defended by the People's Protection Units, or YPG. These areas were of vital importance, as the Turkish border provided a quiet front where very few troops were needed. The border had become a pipeline for foreign fighters wishing to join the Islamic State, and a bountiful smuggling route for oil and weapons, illegal trade that the Turkish government was rumored to actively encourage. This mild support for ISIS stemmed from Turkey's longtime grudge against the YPG, which had supported Kurdish PKK militants in their war of independence against Turkey. To give an idea of the scope of resources flowing over the border into ISIS territory, it is estimated that 6,000 foreign fighters crossed the border to join ISIS. Therefore, control of this border area became paramount to the group's state-building and military activities in both Iraq and Syria. In mid-September, ISIS forces began massing thousands of fighters on the outskirts of the Kobane canton. Outnumbered and outgunned, FSA troops near the city of Manbij fell back and retreated toward the city of Kobane. With around 4,000 fighters in place, ISIS pushed forward, capturing a key bridge over the Euphrates and launching a massive offensive all along the front line. Without any armored forces and limited ammunition, YPG units steadily retreated. Fearing an ISIS takeover of the region, as many as 130,000 civilians crossed the border into Turkey, abandoning their homes and most of their belongings. 300 YPG reinforcements crossed over from Turkey to reinforce the defense around Kobane, but the noose around the embattled city continued to tighten. On September 27th, YPG fighters were given reason to celebrate as US warplanes launched a series of airstrikes against the advancing tide of ISIS forces. This marked the beginning of a wider US air offensive, targeting command centers, training camps, and other critical infrastructure all over Syria. The following day, a further 1,500 YPG fighters crossed the border from Turkey and reinforced the city's defenders. Despite the airstrikes, ISIS continued the advance and fully besieged the city by early October. After advancing into the city's outskirts, several attempts were made to breach the defenses, but heavy resistance and coalition airstrikes pushed them back. Casualties continued to mount as precision strikes decimated armor and mobile transport units. ISIS fighters regrouped and launched a large-scale assault against Mr. Hill, the highest point overlooking the city. On the jagged heights, the YPG mounted a ferocious resistance. Hand-to-hand fighting ensued, with YPG forces slowly retreating. It was here that Kurdish heroism displayed itself, as one Kurdish female fighter, named Dilar Kanj Kamis, found herself surrounded. She took the pin out of her grenade and jumped into a group of ISIS fighters, killing herself and at least 10 other enemy combatants. Soon the hill fell, and Kurdish fighters withdrew into the city. Taking advantage of their dominant position on the hill, ISIS fighters directed covering fire against the city's outer buildings. Under this protective shield of steel and fire, dozens of fighters sprinted across the open fields and entered Kobane's southeastern edge. By the end of the day, 2 neighborhoods were captured. Following this advance, US airstrikes pounded ISIS positions, and the YPG counteroffensive managed to reclaim most of the lost territory. At this point, around 5,000 ISIS fighters had reinforced the assault on Kobane, bringing total numbers up to 9,000 strong. In contrast, the YPG and FSA forces only numbered around 3,000. With fresh forces pouring in, ISIS launched another offensive against the eastern sector of the city, overrunning several YPG units and capturing about a third of the town, including the police station. The following day, US airstrikes demolished the police station, killing all fighters inside. In response, ISIS fighters set fire to several buildings and burned tires, creating a smokescreen to shield their forces from the airstrikes. YPG units soon counterattacked, retaking some ground, and laying siege to a group of fighters defending the ruins of the police station. This unit was quickly overwhelmed, with everyone being either killed or captured. As the battle dragged on, YPG units began to run dangerously low on ammunition. ISIS spearheaded a new assault on the city with recently captured tanks, which cleared several streets and pushed into the heart of the downtown area, capturing the YPG military headquarters. This brought them within striking range of the highly strategic border crossing into Turkey. West of the city, YPG units withdrew from Shire Hill, creating a stronger defense by shortening their front line. As coalition air power continued to take a toll on ISIS military strength, they began using motorcycles to ferry ammunition to the front. They even flew Kurdish flags on their vehicles, and dressed their soldiers in YPG uniforms, in an attempt to confuse coalition airplanes and infiltrate enemy lines. With coalition airstrikes paving the way, YPG units moved west and again captured Shire Hill. To counter this, ISIS fighters launched an assault toward the center of the town, but were driven back by heavy airstrikes. In the northwest of Kobane, a sudden push was launched in the direction of the border crossing. With a suicide truck bomber leading the charge, a large gap was made in the line, and ISIS fighters broke through, capturing the cultural center. In the next stage of the attack, a bomber tried to breach the defenses near the border crossing, but his bomb detonated prematurely, failing to cause any damage to the enemy line. The attack fizzled out, and the Kurds counterattacked, recapturing a few positions in the southern sector. In the following days, heavy airstrikes pounded ISIS positions. Kurdish forces managed to retake 80% of the city, as ISIS units withdrew to regroup in the surrounding hills. With fresh reinforcements at hand, ISIS fighters hoped to cut the only lifeline into the city, and launched a massive assault toward the border crossing. Kurdish fighters repulsed this push, inflicting heavy losses. ISIS fighters continued to contest parts of the city, but held back the brunt of their forces, and instead relied on artillery and mortars to weaken the defenses. The coalition airdropped several crates of medicine and ammunition to the defenders, but at least one missed its target, as ISIS circulated a video claiming to have captured the missing supplies. As the battle wore on, the airstrikes began to seriously weaken ISIS military capabilities. Their fighters carried out several more attacks against the strategic border crossing, but each was repulsed with heavy losses. What followed was a battle of attrition, with ISIS units stubbornly clinging on to their positions, as Kurdish fighters directed coalition air power to systematically obliterate every position that resisted a Kurdish advance. Hundreds of Iraqi Peshmerga joined the battle, bringing heavy weaponry and ammunition. Gradually, ISIS fighters were pushed out of the city, and on January 19th, Mistinor Hill was recaptured, thus cutting off the main supply route to ISIS fighters in the city. Several failed attempts were made to retake the high ground, but at the end of January, ISIS withdrew the last of its fighters from the city, and with the YPG in hot pursuit, began a rapid retreat to the Kobani canton's original territorial boundaries. This battle marked a turning point in the war against the Islamic State. Failure to take Kobani resulted in the death of as many as 2,000 ISIS fighters, many of them hardened veterans of the Iraqi-American War. The loss of these fighters significantly blunted ISIS' offensive capability, and it must be noted that the entry of American air power marked the real turning point, as dominance of the air made it impossible for ISIS to sustain offensives without losing most of their heavy weaponry and supplies. As time wore on, ISIS moved its heavy weapons and many of its best fighters to front lines in the Homs Desert and to the siege of Deir ez-Zor. This shielded them for a time, as the Americans refused to assist the Assad regime and were content to sit and watch as their two geopolitical enemies desperately fought each other for supremacy. In the next episode, I will cover the massive ISIS offensive in the eastern Homs Desert and the epic battle for the ancient Roman city of Palmyra. If you enjoyed this content and would like to see this channel grow, please consider supporting me on Patreon or over PayPal. Thank you.